3 women, 1 house, 1 summer night, and then just silence. A silence that's now stretched over 3 decades. A void that has swallowed every hope, every lead, every desperate plea for answers. It was June 7th, 1992, in Springfield, Missouri, when Sherrill Levitt, her daughter Suzie Streeter, and Suzie's friend Stacy McCall vanished from Sherrill's home. Gone without a trace, no ransom note, no credible sightings. Just an eerie scene. Personal belongings left behind as if they simply stepped out for a moment. And a broken porch light, a silent, shattered witness to a night that plunged 3 families and an entire community into a darkness that just won't end. This isn't just a story about missing people. It's a labyrinth of chilling theories, a chilling testament to how utterly people can disappear, leaving behind only questions that fester and multiply with each passing year. June 6, 1992. For 19-year-old Suzie Streeter and 18-year-old Stacy McCall, it should have been a night of pure celebration, the kind that promised bright futures. They just graduated from Kickapoo High School, diplomas clutched in their hands, the whole world seemingly waiting for them. The evening was a happy blur of parties, laughter, and those late-night talks that feel like the perfect end to one chapter and the exciting start of another. Suzie, blonde and full of life, and Stacy, known for her warm smile and kind heart, were best friends, right on the edge of adulthood together. Suzie's mom, Sherrill Levitt, was 47. A cosmetologist, she was a single mother who, by all accounts, adored Suzie. That evening, Sherrill had proudly watched Suzie graduate. Later, around 11:15 p.m., Sherrill chatted with a friend on the phone. Just a normal conversation about painting a chest of drawers. A little snapshot of ordinary life, only hours before everything turned upside down. After hitting a few graduation parties, Suzie and Stacy reportedly left the last one around 2 a.m. on June 7th. The plan? Head back to Suzie and Sherrill's place at 1717 East Delmer Street for the night. They were probably planning to keep the party going or just crash after a huge day. They were seen leaving that final party, each in her own car. Stacy had mentioned to her mom, Janice McCall, that they might even drive to a friend's place in Branson if it got too late or if they were too wiped to go further. But their cars being at the Delmer Street house the next morning told a different story. They'd made it to Sherrill's. Evidence suggests they got there and maybe even started to get ready for bed. Their jewelry was found in the bathroom, along with damp washcloths, a hint they might have been washing off their makeup. Stacy's shorts were apparently found neatly folded on top of her shoes. These were the very last known, normal moments before their ordinary night fell into an abyss. What exactly happened between their arrival after 2 a.m. and the first worried phone calls the next morning? That's still a haunting, terrifying blank. The morning of June 7th, 1992, dawned with a strange, unsettling quiet over 1717 East Delmer Street. Friends of Suzie and Stacy, who'd made plans to meet them for a trip to a water park, started to get antsy when the girls were no-shows and weren't answering their phones. One friend, Janelle Kirby, along with her boyfriend, decided to swing by Sherrill Levitt's house to see what was up. What they walked into was a scene that was both strangely normal and deeply, deeply wrong. The front door? Unlocked. Sherrill's car was in the driveway, and so were Suzie's and Stacy's. Inside, the TV in Suzie's room was still on, its silent, flickering glow lighting the room. All 3 women's purses were found neatly placed together. Their keys, cigarettes, and cash, all left behind. Sherrill's bed looked like it had been slept in. The family dog, a little Yorkshire Terrier named Cinnamon, was agitated but physically fine, found inside the house. This detail about the dog struck those who knew Sherrill as particularly odd. She adored Cinnamon and wouldn't have just left her unattended for long. Plus, it's unlikely Cinnamon would have stayed quiet if strangers had forced their way in. The only obvious sign that something was wrong was outside. The glass globe of the porch light was shattered, scattered in pieces on the porch. One of the friends, trying to be helpful before anyone grasped how serious things were, actually swept up the broken glass. It was a well-intentioned act, but it might have destroyed crucial evidence. That contamination of the scene would become a major headache. It's estimated that somewhere between 10 to 20 people, friends and family, frantic with worry, had walked through the house before the police were officially called and secured the area. As more friends and family showed up, concern quickly spiraled into alarm. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, arrived. She too noticed the eerie normalcy inside, a stark contrast to the unexplained absence of her daughter and her friends. Janice later remembered hearing a strange message on the answering machine. In a heartbreaking turn, she accidentally erased the message while trying to play it back. Investigators would later mourn that loss, wondering if it held a clue, no matter how small. Adding to the strangeness, while friends were at the house that morning, another visitor apparently got 2 obscene and profane phone calls from an unidentified man making sexual innuendos. Were these calls just a twisted prank, or something far more sinister tied to the disappearances? We still don't know. By late afternoon, with no sign of the women and a dreadful feeling sinking in, the Springfield Police Department was called. The house on Delmer Street went from being a home to a crime scene, the heart of a mystery that would only get deeper. The unsettling silence of that house, with all its abandoned belongings, practically screamed abduction, a sudden, efficient removal of 3 women from their lives, leaving almost nothing tangible behind. When the Springfield Police Department got to 1717 East Delmer Street, they were faced with a scene that made no sense. As mentioned, all of Sherrill, Suzie, and Stacy's personal items, their purses, money, clothes, cars, and keys were still there. This immediately signaled that the women hadn't just up and left. It looked like they'd been taken, against their will, with hardly any chance to fight back or grab their things. The house itself offered very few clues. Beyond that shattered porch light, there were no obvious signs of a struggle inside. No forced entry, no ransacked rooms, no blood. It was as if the women had just vanished into thin air. This lack of physical evidence became one of the most frustrating parts of the early investigation. And of course, the initial contamination of the scene by well-meaning friends and family was a huge challenge, possibly covering up or destroying tiny bits of evidence that could have been critical. Investigators started the long process of piecing together the women's last known movements, interviewing anyone who might have seen or heard anything. Suzie Streeter and Stacy McCall were last definitively seen around 2:15 on June 7th, leaving that graduation party. Sherrill Levitt's last known contact was that phone call around 11:15 p.m. the night before. So the window for when they disappeared was pretty narrow, sometime between roughly 2:15 am and when the first friends showed up at the house later that morning, around 8 or 9 a.m. when calls started going unanswered. The search quickly ramped up. Local police were soon joined by the Missouri State Highway Patrol and the FBI. Flyers with the women's pictures and descriptions went up everywhere. The case grabbed national media attention, featured on shows like 48 Hours and America's Most Wanted, which brought in a flood of tips. Investigators would eventually sift through over 5,000 tips from the public, but not a single one led to a clear breakthrough or helped find the women. An FBI profiler who looked at the case suggested it was likely the work of one person, or if there was an accomplice, that second person might not have initially known the full extent of what was happening. Investigators also guessed that the abductor or abductors probably used a larger vehicle, like a van, to move 3 adult women. The FBI believed the person responsible was likely familiar with the area of the crime, and he may have frequently been out and about at odd hours. They also pointed out that people who know the suspect may not believe that he is capable of committing this type of crime, and he may not have a history of committing crimes of violence. One tip that seemed really promising, but ended up going nowhere, involved a man who called the America's Most Wanted hotline on December 31st, 1992. Police said the caller had prime knowledge of the abductions. But tragically, the call got disconnected when the switchboard operator tried to patch him through to Springfield investigators. Despite public pleas for this man to call back, he never did. Those first days and weeks of the investigation were filled with a desperate hunt for answers. But the baffling lack of evidence and the disturbingly clean nature of the abduction scene left authorities wrestling with a profound mystery. The women's families, suddenly thrown into an unimaginable nightmare, could only wait and hope. As the initial flurry of activity slowly died down, the grim reality began to set in. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. The darkness was just starting to settle. As days bled into weeks and weeks into months with no solid leads, the investigation into the Springfield Three's disappearance increasingly leaned into exploring different theories. The clean crime scene and the swift abduction of 3 women hinted at planning and purpose. One major idea was that this wasn't random at all, but a targeted attack aimed specifically at one of the women. Theory 1. Was Sherrill Levitt the target? Some investigators thought Sherrill Levitt might have been the main target. Why? Well, the thinking was that she had an established routine, and she was the only one definitely expected to be at the East Delmer Street house that night. Suzie and Stacy's decision to stay over was a bit spontaneous, pretty normal for teenagers after a late night, but maybe not something an outsider could have counted on. If someone had a grudge against Sherrill or a disturbing interest in her, they'd know her address and that she lived there. But what motive could someone have for targeting Sherrill? That's where things get speculative. A disgruntled ex-acquaintance? A stalker? Someone connected to her work as a cosmetologist? Sherrill was described as a single mom, and generally, there wasn't much in her known background to suggest she was involved in anything dangerous. However, an abductor focused only on Sherrill might have been surprised by Suzie and Stacy's presence. That could have forced a change of plans, meaning they had to take all 3 to eliminate witnesses. That broken porch light? It could signal a confrontation right at the door, perhaps when Sherrill answered a knock, not expecting anyone so late. The arguments against this theory often point to the fact that no clear enemies or dangerous connections in Sherrill's life have ever surfaced. If she was the specific target of a premeditated crime, the person responsible was exceptionally careful not to leave any clues pointing back to a personal vendetta against her. Plus, abducting 2 more young women dramatically increases the risk for the perpetrator. That's a complication someone targeting only Sherrill might have tried to avoid, unless silencing witnesses became absolutely critical. Theory 2. Was Suzie Streeter the target? Another strong theory suggested that Sherrill's daughter, 19-year-old Suzie Streeter, was the intended victim. Suzie was just stepping into adulthood, and like many young people, she reportedly had a diverse group of friends. Some accounts hint that this circle sometimes brushed up against trouble. This theory suggests that someone from Suzie's social scene, maybe an ex-boyfriend or someone she or her friends had a conflict with, might have sought her out for revenge or due to an unhealthy obsession. A key name that came up with this theory is Dustin Rekla, one of Suzie Streeter's ex-boyfriends. Months before the disappearances, Rekla and some of his buddies were involved in a pretty bizarre crime, vandalizing a mausoleum and stealing gold fillings from human skulls. Suzie had reportedly given a statement to the police about this incident, possibly implicating Rekla or his friends. This led to speculation that the disappearances could have been retaliation against Suzie for talking to law enforcement. If Suzie was the target, her mother Sherrill and her friend Stacy could have become collateral damage, unlucky witnesses who were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time and were taken to keep them quiet. The strength of this theory lies in a potential clear motive: revenge. And revenge can be a powerful driver in violent crimes. The timing, relatively soon after the grave robbery and Suzie's statement, could also be seen as significant. However, There's never been any direct evidence linking Rekla or his friends to the disappearances, and no charges were ever filed against him in connection with this case. He, along with others, was questioned, but the trail seemed to go cold. Critics might argue that abducting 3 women, including an adult and another teenager, is a massive escalation from a motive stemming from a non-violent, albeit macabre, prior offense. It would require a serious level of ruthlessness and planning. Both of these targeted theories paint a chilling picture: an offender who knew, at least vaguely, one of the victims. It suggests a personal vendetta or a specific dark purpose. The efficiency of the abduction implies the perpetrator might have known the house layout or the victim's habits. They managed to control 3 women, presumably quickly and without a major struggle that would have alerted neighbors, and then transport them away, all while leaving almost no evidence. This points to a terrifying level of determination. Whether the focus was Sherrill or Suzie, the big question, if it was a targeted attack, is how did the perpetrator manage to stay completely silent for decades, leaving no trace of their identity or where the women ended up? While theories about a targeted attack on Sherrill or Suzie offer potential motives, there's another possibility, perhaps even more terrifying, that the Springfield Three were victims of a completely random act of violence, carried out by a stranger or strangers. This theory suggests the women were simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, their paths tragically crossing with a predator. Theory 3. Random act of violence by an unknown perpetrator. This line of thinking suggests the crime could have been committed by a sexual sadist or an opportunistic killer who just happened upon Suzie and Stacy as they drove home late that night. Springfield, like any city, wasn't immune to individuals capable of extreme violence. The 2 young women, perhaps spotted in their distinct red cars, might have been followed back to the house on Delmer Street. The lack of a clear motive tied to any one of the women, and the absence of any obvious prior connection between the victims and a known suspect, gives some weight to this theory. Random crimes often don't have a discernible personal vendetta behind them. The perpetrator's motive in such a scenario is usually rooted in their own dark compulsions, a desire for control, sexual violence, or simply the thrill of the act itself. An FBI profiler suggested the offender might be someone familiar with the Springfield area, someone who could blend in and perhaps had committed, or would go on to commit, other violent acts. This individual might have been out trolling for victims that night, and seeing 2 young women returning home late presented an opportunity. That broken porch light? It could have been an initial act to disable any outside lighting, allowing them to approach the house under cover of darkness. Or it could have shattered during a brief confrontation as the perpetrator forced their way in or subdued one of the women near the entrance. The speed and efficiency of the abduction, even in a random scenario, are still bone-chilling. To control and remove 3 women without causing a major disturbance implies a perpetrator who is either very skilled, very lucky, or perhaps armed and able to quickly intimidate the victims into compliance. Sherrill, awakened by a commotion or confronting an intruder who had already encountered Suzie and Stacy, would have found herself in an utterly impossible situation. The most disturbing thing about the random act theory is its complete senselessness. It implies that no amount of caution or good judgment on the part of the victims could necessarily have stopped it. They were just living their lives, celebrating a milestone, when they crossed paths with an unknown monster. This theory also opens the door to the possibility of a serial offender, someone who might have been active in the region at the time, whose crimes may or may not have ever been linked. The idea that the perpetrator could be anyone, someone who just melted back into society leaving no clues, is a particularly haunting thought for the families and the community. This theory is bolstered by the sheer lack of evidence pointing to a specific, known individual with a clear motive against either Sherrill or Suzie. While targeted attacks often leave faint trails of prior conflict or association, a truly random attack by a stranger can be exceptionally difficult to solve because there's no pre-existing relationship to investigate. The perpetrator takes their secrets with them, and unless they slip up, get caught for another crime and confess, or new forensic evidence suddenly appears, the case can stay cold forever. The random attacker theory forces us to confront a darker side of human nature, the existence of individuals who prey on others without specific cause, driven only by their own malevolent desires. For the Springfield community, and for anyone who follows this case, it's a chilling reminder of our vulnerability, and the terrifying possibility that sometimes darkness strikes without reason or warning, leaving behind only an echoing silence and a tangled web of unanswered questions. The idea of an unknown predator successfully abducting 3 women and vanishing without a trace is for many the most disturbing theory of all. Over the decades, while no one has ever been charged in the disappearance of the Springfield Three, several individuals have definitely come under the microscope, their names popping up again and again in discussions about the case. These aren't just abstract theories. They involve real people whose histories, and in some cases, their own statements, have cast some very long shadows. Robert Craig Cox. Perhaps the most prominent and frequently discussed person of interest is Robert Craig Cox. Cox was a convicted kidnapper and had a history of violence against women. Critically, he was living right there in Springfield, Missouri, at the time of the women's disappearance in June 1992. Before this, Cox had actually been convicted of murdering a 19-year-old woman, Sharon Zellers, in Florida back in 1978, and was sentenced to death. However, this conviction was overturned on appeal in 1989 due to insufficient evidence. He was then sent back to California to finish a sentence for kidnapping and assault, got paroled, and eventually wound up in Springfield. Cox was interviewed by investigators in 1992 about the Springfield Three. At that time, he claimed he was with his girlfriend at church the morning after the women disappeared. His girlfriend initially backed up this alibi, but later she recanted her statement, admitting that Cox had asked her to say that, which immediately made his original story look pretty suspicious. Cox also told investigators he was at his parents' house on the night of June 6th. His parents confirmed this, though they also reportedly admitted they were asleep and couldn't be sure he was there the entire night. What really pushed Cox into the spotlight were statements he made years later. In 1996 and 1997, while locked up in Texas for an unrelated aggravated robbery, Cox told journalists and reportedly investigators that he knew the Springfield Three had been murdered and that their bodies would never be found. He claimed he wouldn't give up more details or the location of the bodies until after his mother passed away. Cox is reportedly eligible for parole in Texas in 2025, and as of early 2022, his mother was still alive. Some investigators, though, have voiced skepticism about Cox's claims, thinking he might just be a publicity hound or playing games with law enforcement. The Springfield police have even stated that no investigators on the case believe Cox has any credibility. Still, his proximity to the crime, his violent past, his shaky alibi, and his chilling statements have kept his name undeniably linked to the case. He even allegedly told reporters that the killer likely posed as a utility worker, a detail that rang true with some early unconfirmed tips about a man looking into a gas leak in the area. The family of Sharon Zellers, the victim in the Florida murder for which Cox was acquitted, reportedly contacted Springfield police after the 3 women vanished, letting them know Cox was in their city. Dustin Rekla. As we touched on earlier, Dustin Rekla, Suzie Streeter's ex-boyfriend, also drew attention. The main reason was his involvement, along with others, in that grave robbery at a local mausoleum several months before the disappearances. Suzie Streeter had reportedly given a statement to police about this incident. This fueled the theory that her disappearance, along with her mother's and Stacy's, could have been an act of revenge or an attempt to silence her. While this offered a potential motive, no direct evidence ever surfaced to definitively link Rekla or his associates to the abductions, and he was never charged in connection with the case. The motorcycle Dangled hog farm search. Another specific lead that sparked a significant investigation involved a tip from a member of a motorcycle gang. This informant, possibly looking for a lighter sentence for his own criminal charges, claimed that the women's bodies were buried on a hog farm in nearby Webster County. The farm was reportedly owned by a convicted murderer. Investigators took this tip very seriously, partly because the informant's criminal background suggested he might actually have access to that kind of information. A thorough search of the property was carried out, possibly using ground-penetrating radar, but unfortunately, no remains or conclusive evidence turned up. Despite the negative result, the tip itself was considered pretty credible at the time. Other persons of interest and unconfirmed leads. Beyond these more prominent names and theories, countless other individuals and leads were undoubtedly looked into over the years. Police got tips about a transient seen near the house and a Dodge van spotted in the area around the time of the disappearances. There was also a theory that the women were buried beneath the south parking garage at Cox Hospital, which was under construction around that time. While the hospital reportedly offered to let police dig, this was never pursued because law enforcement didn't deem the tip credible enough. The sheer volume of information, often vague or impossible to verify, is a common problem in high-profile unsolved cases. The difficulty in narrowing down suspects, or even confirming a primary theory, all comes back to the fundamental problem: the almost complete lack of physical evidence from the crime scene and the fact that the victims themselves are missing. Without bodies, forensic evidence is scarce, and the how and who remain infuriatingly out of reach. Each potential suspect or theory comes with its own set of supporting points and contradictions. Robert Craig Cox's statements are tantalizing but unverified, and perhaps just self-serving. The revenge motive against Suzie is plausible but lacks concrete proof. The random killer theory is terrifyingly possible, but offers no specific direction for investigators. The shadows in the periphery remain just that, shadows. For the families, this uncertainty is an agonizing part of their decades-long ordeal. For investigators, the challenge is to find a flicker of light in that darkness, a new piece of information or a fresh look at old facts that could finally reveal the truth. As of now, despite thousands of tips and countless hours of investigation, no one has ever been formally charged with the abduction and presumed murder of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall. The case remains open, a haunting testament to a crime that, for all intents and purposes, was perfectly executed in its initial stages, leaving a void where answers should be. More than 3 decades. That's how long it's been since June 7, 1992. Yet, the disappearance of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall, the Springfield Three, is still an open wound for their families, their friends, and the entire Springfield community. The initial shock and frantic searching have long since faded, replaced by a persistent, gnawing ache of not knowing. This isn't just a cold case. It's a never-ending state of limbo for those left behind. The impact on the families? It's immeasurable. Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, became a prominent voice, working tirelessly to keep her daughter's case, and those of Sherrill and Suzie, from fading from public memory. She attended memorial events, spoke with the media, and relentlessly pushed for the investigation to continue. She embodied the resilience and enduring hope of a parent desperate for answers. In a 2017 interview, she put the enduring pain into words. "I expected her home that night, the next day, maybe a couple of days afterward. Never in my wildest imagination did I ever think that it would be 25 years later, and I would be saying Stacy is still missing." For the families, there are no anniversaries of resolution, only milestones of continued absence. Sherrill Levitt and Suzie Streeter were declared legally dead in 1997. A legal step, yes, but not closure for their loved ones. Their case files, however, officially remain classified as missing. The Springfield Police Department, along with the FBI, officially state the investigation is ongoing. They still ask the public for tips, holding onto the hope that someone, somewhere, has a piece of information that could finally unlock this mystery. A reward fund, reportedly around $43,000, is still available for information that leads to finding the women and prosecuting whoever is responsible. But without significant new evidence, the case has largely been stalled for many years. Investigators have reportedly decided against exhuming certain suspected grave sites, citing the high cost and a lack of solid evidence to justify such actions. The main challenges that have plagued this investigation from day one are still here today. That initial contamination of the crime scene at 1717 East Delmer Street was a critical blow, potentially robbing investigators of vital forensic clues. The almost complete lack of physical evidence, no signs of a struggle, no murder weapons, no definitive DNA linking a suspect to the scene or the women has left investigators with precious little to work with. That shattered porch light remains one of the few tangible, yet frustratingly ambiguous, pieces of potential evidence from the scene itself. And then there's that mysterious, accidentally erased answering machine message, another haunting what if in the case. Could it have held the voice of the abductor? A veiled threat? A clue, however faint? Its loss is a persistent source of frustration. Over the years, new technologies and investigative techniques have come a long way. DNA databases have solved countless cold cases. Yet, for the Springfield Three, these advancements haven't led to a breakthrough, mainly because there's so little initial forensic material to compare against. The enduring hope is that maybe an old piece of evidence, re-examined with new technology, might one day offer a clue. Or perhaps a deathbed confession, a newly surfaced witness, or an unrelated arrest of the perpetrator could finally break the silence. The community of Springfield hasn't forgotten. Memorials like a bench dedicated to the women in Phelps Grove Park stand as quiet reminders. Podcasts, documentaries, and online forums continue to discuss the case, introducing it to new generations and keeping that faint hope for answers alive. But for now, the decades of darkness continue. The silence that fell over the Levitt home on that June night in 1992 still echoes, a chilling testament to 3 lives stolen and a mystery that refuses to give up its secrets. The case of the Springfield Three serves as a stark reminder that sometimes, despite every effort, the truth can remain agonizingly out of reach, buried deep beneath layers of time, fear, and silence. The disappearance of the Springfield Three is a case built on theories and so many unanswered questions. What do you think happened that night? Share your thoughts and theories respectfully in the comments below. If you find value in exploring these unsolved mysteries and want to help keep these stories alive, please consider subscribing and liking this video. Your engagement really does help make sure these cases aren't forgotten. The fate of Sherrill Levitt, Suzie Streeter, and Stacy McCall remains one of America's most disturbing and enduring unsolved mysteries. 3 women, their one moment and gone the next, leaving behind a home filled with their possessions and a community haunted by their absence. Was it a meticulously planned abduction by someone they knew, a dark secret festering for years? Or was it a terrifyingly random act of violence, a monstrous encounter in the late hours of a summer night? Each theory carries its own chilling weight, painting a grim picture of what their final moments might have been like. Despite thousands of tips, decades of investigation, and the tireless efforts of their families, the truth remains shrouded in darkness. The silence from that June night in 1992 has proven impenetrable, the questions only multiplying with each passing year. The Springfield Three are more than just names in a cold case file. They are a stark reminder of how fragile life can be, and the terrifying reality that sometimes answers stay just out of reach, lost in the decades of darkness. Perhaps one day, a crucial piece of information will finally surface, breaking the silence and bringing whatever measure of peace is possible to those who still wait. Until then, the disturbing theories are all that remain.